Welcome to Small Talk, where each week we sit down to discuss the sermon-based small group questions at Wallula Christian Church.
Hello and welcome back to Wallula's weekly podcast, Small Talk. My name is Zach Bowen. I'm the student pastor here at Wallula. I'm joined, as always, by Craig Archer, our worship pastor, and Lance Kaufman, our lead pastor. I always pause when I'm like, how do I describe you? Lead pastor, senior pastor, head pastor.
It is confusing.
The pastor, yeah.
Right.
And so I've only done this for a year and a half now, so maybe I'll get it.
We all work here.
We all work here. We're the pastors, and not even all of them.
That's right.
But we are going to be looking at last week's message entitled Be Sure to Pray. We were going through Matthew chapter 6, looking at the parts about prayer, specifically when Jesus said, this is how you are to pray. And I always tell the students, like, so many times when someone asks Jesus a question, he gives them like a story or something
Right.
asked. And this time they were like, he's like, here's how to do it. And literally word for word, praise the prayer.
Right.
And I was like, oh, that's nice. You have the answer. There was no ambiguity there. So we'll be looking deeper into that today. But first, like always, we're going to start off with a fun question. And it says, if you could invent a holiday, what would it be? And what would you call it? So not like last week, your most embarrassing moment, which is a personal anecdote. This is, you got to really think, what holiday would you invent if you could?
Man,
I don't know.
it's a hard one.
Is it?
Yeah. Did you come up with a holiday?
I did. I came up with.
Name it. I didn't even.
Do you expect anything less from Zach?
I came up with two, and I named them both.
You named them both.
And I have a funny one. I'll just go first.
Yeah.
So I have a funny one and I thought, like, this is actually a good one. I thought.
Okay.
So both of them were on the same day. Or no, that's not true. So I thought about like February 29th because it's a weird one because it only comes around once every 4 years and blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
And so I was kind of thinking that. And so I said National Middle Child Day because their holiday would only be once every 4 years, just something else to complain about. So
Shout out to Lacey.
Yes, absolutely. And so, we'll give you a holiday. Nationally recognized.
4 years.
Once every 4 years.
Yeah.
That'll come around. So anyway, National Middle Child Day, February 29th. And the other one, the one I thought, oh, this would be good, is National Election Day. So just the second Thursday of every November, make it a holiday. Just people can vote.
Yeah.
Just however you want to vote, that's fine. Just go vote. I think that's the biggest thing of, like, there's just always low attendance, especially, you know,
I've heard that before.
If it's not a, and so that wasn't my idea.
Right.
I just thought that would be a good one. And I'm all for it. So I think voting's important, and I think that would be good, but also National Middle Child Day is
that's funny.
pretty funny. Yeah. I like that one. So
National Voting Day, huh?
yeah.
Except for the election workers.
I know. Well,
don't get the
okay.
day off.
Look, no one's going to get all the days off.
know,
So I had to work on Thanksgiving when I was at Kmart, and so
Quick Trip. I mean, you have to be able to go to Quick Trip,
Right.
and those poor guys wouldn't be able to vote.
Yep.
They'd be
it's a step.
underrepresented.
It's a step. Yes,
They'd
that's
be
right.
Underrepresented.
Yes.
Yeah.
But they have to do
Those
that
are good
anyway.
ones.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Those are good ones. I didn't come up with a name or anything. Now I'm kind of thinking. Did you name one, Craig?
No. And so, before we started, Zach got up here.
Right.
And he's like, you got one? I said, no.
Yeah.
And I think the hard part is I kept thinking of things. Like, my first thought was like, I like to eat ice cream. Let's have a day that celebrates eating ice cream.
Right.
That already exists.
Yes.
So you go on to the next thing. Well, that
they have so many.
Keeps going and going.
Mm-hmm.
So many national days of
Right.
or whatever. Yeah.
And as I was continuing to set up, I thought, what do I enjoy? So I went through this list, and then I thought, I mean, there's probably some day already about like bikes or whatever.
I think you said coffee.
But I was gonna say, there should be a day where it's like, go outside and ride a bike day, because no one's ever been mad while they ride a bike. I don't think.
I mean, people driving were probably mad at
Right.
But it's hard.
The bike riders are fine.
There
the
were
bike
these
riders.
two bicyclists on the road, just in the middle of the road the other day, and I'm like,
No,
what?
that's not good.
Yeah, what's going
But
on?
that's what's
side
weird.
by side, like
that's what's weird.
chips,
You're not supposed to ride on the sidewalk though, are you? With a bike?
Well, there was a bike path
Oh,
down
okay,
in the middle
yeah.
of the road. It was on.
Yeah.
but I'll see someone on a bike. I'm like, get on the sidewalk, and then I forget, like, oh wait, they're actually obeying the law,
Right.
But I'm like, there's a sidewalk that no one's on. Just
They should be single file though, right? Shouldn't they? Bicyclists.
Yeah, I think single file. I mean,
Single file.
when you ride on the road, are you just like, this is my spot and I'm just part of traffic like everything else, or do you stay on the side where it's like, hey, cars can pass if they need to, or is that illegal to pass? I don't even know.
No, I mean, so I don't go on the road very much because
That's a good choice, I think.
it scares me, honestly.
Right.
When I was dumb in college, I rode. I was in Manhattan, so the highway that goes out to Tuttle Creek, I rode my bike on that, and looking back,
On the highway.
yeah, like, what was I doing?
Yeah.
Right.
You know, and there's actually a cyclist that got hit on the highway south of Manhattan when I was my last year, and so I was like, all right, I'm done. I'm not doing that. So I'll ride on residential, like through neighborhoods to get to a trail, basically.
Right.
And so I don't have to worry about traffic as much
Yeah.
because it's slow and there's just not that many cars. But so yeah, I like to ride on like oversized paved trails.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Is there not already
There has to be a
National
Ride Your
Bike Day or something like that? There's not. That doesn't
there
exist.
probably is.
There has to be.
There
That
probably
sounds like
is.
a thing.
I just think more people should participate then.
There you go.
Just in the middle of your workday,
Take
go
a bicycle ride.
hop on a bike.
Yeah.
You'll come back a little bit
Have
happier.
have you guys ever been surprised on like Facebook, and it's like, oh, this was a holiday, like it's National Sons Day or National Daughters Day. Everyone's posting there, and I was like, oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah,
Oh,
how are
And
people
they'll post-
informed?
Yeah,
No.
and like they just knew, and then
Yeah.
and then
I feel like I can honestly say I've never posted a National Sons or Daughters Day picture of my son or daughters, and I don't feel like there's lots of reasons that probably I haven't been a very good parent, but that's not one of them. Right? that like, no, we gave you life, we raised you and fed you and clothed you.
Isn't this enough?
Every
Isn't
day was National Fathers and Sons, Sons and Daughters Day in our house. So
well, and also even if you did, would they even know? Are they on Facebook? I mean, that's not the preferred social media of,
right? Yeah,
of kids.
Yeah, not really. I mean, they are. I think kind of. You hear that. This is off topic, but I mentioned on Sunday, I was reading all about these social media things and trying to figure out, and people always say that young people, students, are not on Facebook. And that is sort of true. Like they don't post on Facebook, but there is an awful lot of people
Like they make
that
an
have
account.
Facebook accounts.
Yeah.
If you want to reach just the large swath of the public, then Facebook is the way to go. I mean, it's hugely popular.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, like my kids don't participate on there.
Right.
I don't know if they look through once in a while or whatever, but they don't post. So I think that's true of young people, but they still have access to it. Yeah. So National Bicycle Day. That's a good day.
Yeah.
There you go.
It's probably
That's a
already
good
out
idea.
there.
That's
so
a good idea,
just
though.
look it up.
That's a good idea. I didn't come up with anything that creative at all. And I like the Middle Child Day on February 29th. That's a good one. We should keep that. You should promote that. That should be a thing. We could do it.
I'll probably forget
Get it on the calendar that we don't know
Yeah.
exists.
I think that's next
Yeah.
year. I think
2084.
I think it's like the same as election cycles. So that which is next year, 2024.
I feel like there's a good joke there as to why I'm not smart enough to make the joke because I don't have any idea why we have leap year. It's the moon, the calendar,
it
and
kinda goes
it doesn't
longer.
add up
Yeah,
or
it's
whatever.
something.
And it's just this weird
I kind of know but
reason.
Yeah, not enough to
I
explain
don't
it.
know at all. It's this weird reason that it fits perfectly with middle children, right? It just you're left out for some odd reason. So, yeah, we should get T-shirts, and that's a good idea. I love that. I'm a middle child, so I'm on board.
Yeah.
So it's November, and I always feel like Thanksgiving gets left out. It's kind of the middle child of the holiday
Yeah, people are
season
already
here.
putting up Christmas
Yeah,
trees and
I'm not opposed. I will tease folks and that sort of thing, but I don't. Look, if you want to put your Christmas tree up, put it up, right? Jesus is here. He came. He was born. We ought to celebrate that. So put your tree up and enjoy yourself. And we've already by we, I mean Sherry has decorated some stuff already, put Christmas decorations out. And so I'm all for that. But I do feel like Thanksgiving is a day that kind of gets, it's a good holiday, I mean, there's pie, that's delicious, and friends and relationships celebrates those. And there's no expectation of
Gifts.
Giving or receiving.
Just show up.
Just
show up. Unless you're the
Make
person
some
hosting,
food,
then there's a lot of expectations.
Well, there's work involved in all of those
Right.
things, but even that, I mean, maybe you share that or whatever, and sometimes we overdo it. Like, it's always been my advice to people: just have it on paper plates. It's all right. Just relax, and it doesn't need to be. It can be whatever you want it to be. If you want to have a fancy dinner, then have a fancy dinner, but you don't have to. And I just think it's a great holiday.
Yeah.
To just be thankful for the relationships in your life and how God has provided and all that. And I do think sometimes it gets overlooked. So maybe I would emphasize Thanksgiving more. Like, I don't know. Thanksgiving plus.
Add gifts.
Just adding plus to everything. Add
What more can
gifts.
you
No.
add? I'm stuffed.
Yeah.
There's no more
Yeah.
food.
Right.
You're not going to add anything like that.
No.
Yeah.
Add
Just
fireworks.
focus on it a little more.
Yeah.
Let it have its day.
I'm trying to think of other holidays, fireworks.
Right. Just let it have
It already
its
has
day.
football. They had the Lions and the Cowboys, and then they added a third game. So
Now there's going to be one on the Friday after
No
Thanksgiving.
way.
Yeah, there's a
Oh,
Friday
wow.
football game. So if you want to watch football, you can.
yeah,
Yeah.
I like
All
that
you
too.
It's like Thanksgiving for another day.
That's right.
Eat your leftovers and
Yeah, there you go.
pretend it's just Thanksgiving again.
Did you guys ever go to the movie theater on Thanksgiving?
No.
That was a thing of ours, and I thought that was just us, but then I saw it come up as a question
Yeah,
somewhere.
lots of people do that.
But like on that night, everyone's hanging out. They're like, "What do you guys want to do? We're all here." And so
Yeah.
we would go, like in high school, we'd go with our cousins and uncles and stuff. We just go to
Yeah.
the movies.
Yeah, no, not as a tradition. We've
Yeah.
never done that.
Well, all right. So as we move on, we're looking, like I said, Matthew chapter 6, especially the part about prayer. And so we have the Lord's Prayer going on, and so it was broken down in different parts during the sermon. But just starting off big picture, this is number 4 on the questions, and it says, "What do you think of the Lord's Prayer, and what comes to mind when you hear it?" It's one of those things that I don't know if it's not transcended pop culture, but it is definitely.
Yep.
You hear about it more.
Right.
Than, it's like even if you
Right.
don't know it quite well enough.
Lots of people have something that comes to
Right.
mind. Like they could maybe recite part of
Yes.
it anyway,
Yeah.
or some version of
Yeah.
it, or like we just talked about Thanksgiving and football. Football comes to mind when I hear the Lord's Prayer. Right, that's kind of a famous. Football teams will kneel and pray the Lord's Prayer together before the game or whatever. A few weeks ago, I was talking with Kevin Ingram, who's president at Manhattan Christian College. He's also the chaplain for the K-State football team, and so he leads those the services for the football team, and evidently lots of good things are going on at the K-State football team, that they has lots of players come to those, that almost all of the coaching staff comes to
cool.
those services, and so that's a pretty cool thing. But he was teaching through the Lord's Prayer.
Oh, okay.
Right here with the Kansas State football team, and the one thing he said to me was, these guys have said it over and over again. They've heard it, and so to kind of break it down and talk about it was an interesting thing for them to do together. So that comes to mind when I think of the Lord's Prayer. I think of so much we can talk about, right? You mentioned earlier, Zach, and I don't remember if this was while we were recording or before, but that Jesus answered in parables all the time, or answered in a question, kind of thing. But here he just lays it out: pray like this, and that's remarkable. And it's also remarkable that I think that it's like two sentences.
Mm-hmm.
There's a few verses here, and it's 4 or 5 lines or whatever in Scripture. It's so short. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because it just comes in this section, right before it. Jesus says, don't stand up in the synagogues or on the street corners, and don't ramble on and on like the pagans. Mm-hmm. And then he said, pray like this, and he gives us 4 lines.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I'm a preacher, so I'm guilty of this. Just think of, the last time you heard somebody pray in public. Mm-hmm. 4 lines or less or more.
Mm-hmm.
How do you do
more.
that?
Yeah.
Is it? And so it's just concise and straight to the point, and so beautiful, I think, because which is sort of the point here in this section. There's no secret language. There's no code. There's no there's no doing enough to be heard by God. Mm-hmm. And in fact, that's in here, right? He said, look, he already knows. So, verse 8 says he already knows. Don't worry about it. And it ought to just set us at ease that we can have a conversation with God because he already knows what we need. And so there's no worrying that he's going to hear or that he's going to come through, that he is God. And so those are some of the things that come to mind when I think of the Lord's Prayer. I just think you can walk through Scripture. I wrote down some of these verses, and we don't need to go through them all. But I mean, if you just search for prayer or what, you're gonna God over and over and over in Scripture tells us to pray, tells us to talk to Him, and that it increases our joy, that it makes a difference in our life, that it brings glory to Him. Just that conversation, and man, what an awesome thing that we can communicate with Him.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Craig?
Yeah, it was funny because it's something that we read or like we hear about a lot. But then the question of what does it make you think of or what comes to mind, I instantly had a flashback to when I was growing up in the Catholic Church, and we would have like the Wednesday night. It wasn't called youth group; it was called something else, and it was more like a class, like Bible class sort of thing.
Right.
And I remember
there's no chubby bunny going on at this.
There was
Bible study, no bounce houses,
no messing around.
I feel like it's a Protestant youth group thing in the '90s. I was so good at Chubby Bunny. We did it all the time.
It was funny. After I became a Christian, I've found all of these, like, I want to say pop culture, but like the culture of the Christian church and like the music I'd never heard and all these things.
Right.
I was brought to the light of all of that. But in these classes, as like an elementary aged kid, we had to memorize this prayer, like Hail Mary, the certain creeds, Apostles' Creed, Nicene Creed, and we would have to go out in the hall with the teacher and recite and mark those off. And for some reason that came to mind, a little flashback to trying as a kid to memorize these. And as a kid, I didn't know, I couldn't wrap my mind around the things I was memorizing.
Right.
And it's like the Our Father who art in heaven, like the old King James kind of language. And so it was something that I knew or had memorized from a really young age. And then looking back, it's like I kind of grew into it and began to understand it. Like some of the things that were in it, like the beginning, like hallowed be your name. Like I could, early on, you kind of get like, okay, and different translations would say it differently, but like the reverence or the awe of God, humbling. But then your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, and it's like that's some big stuff. And it feel like I had to grow into that. And after becoming a Christian and like your will be done, like when we were praying that, like we're praying that for God to act His will upon this earth, but like that's partly on me too, to be in line with His will and partner with Him in what He's doing. And it's like, you're like heaven come to earth, keep like Jesus ushered in the kingdom, and we're playing a role in that. And this is also pointing towards the end. So like all of this stuff is just like you said, it's so short,
Right.
and it's packed with so much stuff at the same time. And as a elementary age kid,
Sure.
I memorized it to check that box and move on to the next thing. But yeah, I feel like I grew into it, and now it's like, okay. And it's still, we're still learning from it, and it still helps us and all that. Yeah.
Yeah. That's funny you mentioned that about the, had to memorize it as a kid, because I think about the things I've had to memorize before, and kind of the same thing. Like, I don't really know, but I like how you said, you grow into it. Because I was about to ask, so like, how did you feel like, when you learned it as a kid or whatever, it's not a big deal. It's just something and like, do you feel like that was still an advantage as you became a Christian and kind of had that in your back pocket? And I love that too. And so I'm okay that students like learning just for the sake of learning for right now. Like, you don't need to know it all, but this does sort of give you, not ammunition, but you have a better understanding. So when you do
foundation,
as you grow, it will grow with you. Like as your understanding grows, it will continue to grow. And as pastors, we're still being challenged by the same things that we already know from this. But Lance, I feel like you, because whenever a lot of times you go last, and so you always start with, "Man, that was really great, guys. You said a lot of what I was going to say." When you think of the Lord's Prayer, what comes to mind? The first thing I put was Floral Heights United Methodist Church. That's where I grew up going in Texas, and we would recite it every week. I can't remember if it was like at the end of the service, but at some point we did it, and I felt really proud. I remember sixth grade, and I was like, I could hang with the adults, and I knew it, and it wasn't even like they had to teach it to us. We had to go out in the hallway. It's just we did it every week. So if you just go to church, you're going to you're just going to know it. And so we would recite it every week. And then, so that's the first thing. And then the second one was, I immediately thought, like Lance, you said, sports teams. Anytime I see players praying before, most of the time you can hear them reciting the Lord's Prayer. It's not like, hey, I'm going to get up and pray and whatever. It's them, it's the one thing that they all know. And which kind of leads to the third thing that it reminds me of. This is the last one. But when I think about it, what comes to mind are two very contrasting points of view when it comes to the Lord's Prayer. And one is something that is very deep and specific, that is full of theological meaning and application, and it's taught to us by Jesus himself of like word to word what to do. And so there's so much that we've already talked about like that. And on the other end of the spectrum, it's this thing that it's said without a lot of thought. People just know it. And so it's like, hey, can you pray? Sure, no problem. Our Father who art in heaven. And you could say it without thinking. So it's just this interesting dynamic of the Lord's Prayer being both this thing that can challenge us and help us grow and shape our theology, and also this, I don't want to say throwaway prayer, but it's like, I don't know what else to say, so I'll just say this, and not
becoming
really
what Jesus was warning about.
Yes, yeah.
Passages.
Yeah, and I don't want to be like those people who do it are babbling or just saying things, but it's almost like, hey, just tell me what I should do and I'll do it. And there's not, and praying from the heart is the missing aspect. So yeah, those are the things that kind of came to mind, both personally and then in culture and in my history. But I think as we move on, one of the big parts that you talked about in your sermon was in point number 3, talking about the idea of fasting. So you were talking about sacrificial praying and the different ways we do that. And one of them you mentioned is fasting. And as you pointed out, I believe correctly, that it's probably the one that gets overlooked within Christianity, especially in America. I would imagine most is not that no one does it, but it's just done less. And so in combining questions 8 and 9, it said, in your own words, how would you describe fasting? What was it for? And then also, have you ever fasted? And then why do you think it's often ignored among Christians today? So as we look at fasting, ideas behind it, why is it ignored? Your experience with it. Craig, what did you have?
Yeah, this is something that it was brought to my attention recently through, there's a pastor named John Mark Comer. He has a really famous book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, and then I haven't read that one, but I read his book on Exodus 34 when I was preaching that passage. But part of his ministry really focuses on like the practices and the life of Jesus. And so his church in Portland has a big focus on that, but he kind of like he started his own kind of like ministry called Practicing the Way that focuses on these like spiritual disciplines. And so I recently I just got his it's like the habit of prayer. So he has like a resource that focuses on like building a habit of prayer, but he has one on fasting, and he has a book coming out that goes through all of it. But he talks about how like that's a regular practice for him, and just like reading that someone is doing that, we don't hear that very often, like Lance said in the sermon. And I think part of it is that I was trying to think really like, why don't we? Because like growing up, you mentioned the 30-hour famine thing in staff meeting.
Yeah.
I heard about that, and I don't know, I just like the people that I have rubbed shoulders with, I just don't see them doing that. So when he said that he does that on a regular basis, I'm kind of like, oh, okay, so why is this such a big deal for him? And he points out like, I think what he thinks in Western culture, we're comfortable, and food isn't something that, by and large, that like we are worried about, or it's like we often know where our next meal is coming from, and so really it comes down to like we're comfortable, and I guess that this practice that like Jesus expected Christians to participate in prayer and fasting, and for some reason that section of his teaching gets overlooked. And so the first time that I fasted for something was I guess it was like 5 years ago now. The campus ministry that I've been helping out with at KU for a long time, Matt and Lexi Meyer, their daughter was born 4 years ago, or 5 years ago almost now, and she was born with a really rare blood disease. I can't remember the name. It's like super long. It's like 500 or less people have had it ever. And so it's like she's going to be in like medical research journals because they're still trying to figure it out. But so when she was first born, they were doing all these tests, and just as an infant, she was having right away to do these blood transfusions. And obviously, as a parent, they're worried out of their mind, and the doctors are trying to describe what this is and what this means for her life. And you have this week-old baby, and you're figuring all this out. And so Matt texted me one day and said, hey, would you fast today and just spend that time praying for my daughter? And that, like, I've always known, like, well, when you fast, you replace that time of eating with prayer. And so, like, the focus of fasting is it's really for our spiritual health, our kind of realizing like our spiritual hunger and need for God, and it wakes up our body and our mind. When that is absent from our day, we recognize it and we feel the effects, and so it's a chance for us to realign ourselves with God. And so we spent that day praying, and I wasn't the only one doing it. He asked a lot of people to participate in that, and she was getting ready to go do a blood transfusion again. This was like round 3 or 4 or 5 or something like that. And so we were praying that she wouldn't need one. And they went to go, they like had her hooked up to the everything ready to go. And then the doctor came in and said they did the testing and they don't need to do the transfusion. And they were so puzzled. And I mean, our answer was, I think God was working in this. And she's almost 5 years old now, and there's ups and downs with that. But after that day, the transfusions and that stuff really slowed down. And really, like, where she's at now, you wouldn't really realize that she was dealing with that. So that's my experience with it. And and yeah, that John Mark Comer resource, and then bringing this up on Sunday morning and hearing Lance preach about it, it's like I feel like it's a little nudge from God, like, hey, don't forget about this because it's in the Bible.
Yeah.
It's important. So
Right. Yeah. I Lance, I even told you I liked what you had said in your sermon because about like what's the point of fasting, and so the idea of just going without something for a period of time, and you had this list of like here are the benefits of it, and I was trying to write it, but it was as far as like you said, developing spiritual strength, that was one of them, but also a way to focus our prayers, straight to God, and also maybe express grief, and just the practice of self-denial. I had a passage that came to me was in 1 Corinthians 6, and it says, I have the right to do anything, you say, but not everything is beneficial. I have the right to do anything, but I will not be mastered by anything. And just that denial of self, just to show that, hey, most of the stuff we do is not bad, but it can be. And so it's sort of a resetting of ourselves to show like, hey, this is not going to control me. And so I was really convicted about this a couple of years ago, and I took a page from Jesus, and I didn't tell anyone. I think you found out when my kids said, oh yeah, our dad's fasting or whatever. And so I was trying not to say anything, but I decided that I would go a year, and every month I would just fast from something different. And I didn't have a big need that I'm like, this is what I'm trying to pray for. I just, this spiritual discipline was not at all it wasn't a discipline at all. And so I had done it once as like a class project, in college. But so I just started making a list of like, what are things that I want to practice taking a step back from. And I would just go a month. And so I did one, the first one was filler media. And what I mean by that is like, I didn't worry about if I was listening to music or whatever, but in between doing things, if I'm doing the dishes, I'm listening to a song. If I'm getting ready in the morning, something's on, a TV or music or whatever. If I'm in my car, I turn it on. And so any type of, like if I'm just working on a project, that's one thing, but just always having noise or something on, I was really convicted about that. So I just had, like TV would be for TV, not just background. So I did that. I did one where it was just food. I did an actual food one where it was like 1 week it was just, I'm going to do one meal. And then the second week it was 2 meals. The third week it was a full day. And then the fourth week it was 2 days. And so just to practice the actual act of that. One was social media or internet, unless it had to do with work. I just didn't do any of that. And then one was just my spending habits, like the amount of time I spend money on food. That's not for meals, like just snacks or whatever. And so I couldn't buy food for a meal, fast food. And then I also couldn't buy anything like snacks or filling in between. And so just little things like that where it was, and I will say I failed every month except for the actual fasting from food. I did that. But like there was always something where something may have come up or I missed a meal or something and I need to get something on the road, or there was always something. But instead of being like, well, I guess I'm done, I just went back into it. And I learned a lot about myself and the things that I thought would be hard that weren't. Like the fasting from food was actually really easy because it was just not going to eat. But then other things like the filler media or whatever, it was like, man, I am really struggling here. Yeah. And so I learned a lot about the things that I think are no big deal that, like I said here, I will not be mastered by anything. And then the last one is like, why do we think it's ignored in our culture or within Christianity today? And I just thought this seemed like the easiest answer for me, that today we like things that are easy. We like things that are convenient. We like things that are at our fingertips. I'll have to just push a button, whatever. And fasting is difficult. It requires sacrifice and self-denial. And it can almost feel extreme to people who just want Christianity to be easy. And it's like you said, I hadn't heard anyone. And it almost feels like, well, this is a super spiritual person who's just doing they're not going out of their way and becoming a monk. They're just doing what is already expected, when you fast, when you pray. And so, but yeah, the whole self-denial thing I think is a big part. And,
Yeah, it's so true. Because one of the, I think I Googled this very question, like, why don't Christians fast? Because just see what other people said. And like you said, like it's in the book. I don't 2 chapters before this, it says Jesus fasted. And then he's like, follow me, do what I do.
Yeah.
Right.
And so we're expected to do it. And then kind of what you were saying, one of the articles I read said, people don't do it, especially now, because of like the internet and television and stuff. Because it used to be, well, the sun goes down and then you just go to sleep. And now it's like you stay up and you watch TV. And if you're watching TV, you're probably snacking. And it's just like this endless cycle. Like, this is what we do.
Right.
And whatever I want,
it's easy.
it's good. And it's not sinful.
Yeah.
But the attitude of like, oh, I'll just do this now. And so, like, even when we go on trips, I'll tell students, like, you're not allowed to get on your phone, even if they bring phones. And I'm like, you're not allowed to. Like, it's okay to be bored. And so it's almost like fasting from that. And the number of times we've come back from a trip and students have said, I actually really like that.
Yeah.
And
Right.
it's just, you know what I mean? But that's
Sure.
a form of, I didn't think of it like this is fasting. I was just like, just be connected to each other.
Yeah.
But it is kind of, in a small way, fasting in that way too.
Yep.
But
Yeah.
what about you, Lance?
Yeah, that's all good stuff. I think, it was interesting. We just touched on it Sunday that there's not a ton in the New Testament about fasting. There's a couple sections in the Gospels where, like you said, I mean, Jesus fasted for 40 days, when he was tempted, and it's mentioned here in Matthew 6, and but I read, and I didn't verify this, so I just read as I was studying this last week that it's not mentioned at all in the epistles, that Paul never talks about fasting, that and so John in his letters and Peter in his letters, they don't talk about fasting at all, and that sounds right. Right, there's nothing that I can pinpoint and think right away.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, this section, I don't remember that, but I didn't go back to verify that. So, but it sounds right, and it's just not mentioned a ton. And we talked Sunday. Well, we have Jesus, and so, do you fast when the bridegroom is here, and now we're now and not yet, and so Jesus is coming back, and we're kind of in this limbo's the wrong word, but in this middle ground where I think it's appropriate for us to follow Jesus and fast, especially, you mentioned, your friend, and that's for sure to seek God's favor when we have a big decision. In Acts chapter 13 and 14, it talks about the folks in local churches fasting when they appointed elders, and when they sent Paul and Barnabas out, they were fasting and making that decision, and so there's mentions of it in the book of Acts, and we know that early Christians practiced fasting from the I'm going to butcher this word, the Didache. Am I saying that right? You guys know what I'm talking about. Didache, the Didache, which is essentially this, that's a word that means doctrine or teaching. And so this was kind of a Christian handbook for the first century Christians. And it would talk about how to baptize people and how to do all these things, and it talked about fasting twice a week, like the Pharisees were fasting twice a week in the New Testament. And so we know that early believers practiced this, and there are good reasons we talked about on Sunday, but the ones that kind of spring to mind and are at the forefront are expressing repentance. Might be a good reason to fast. To seek God's favor is a good reason to fast. And then the third one that I don't think we talk about much, but it ought to be a part of our practice, is that we're fasting because we're looking forward to Jesus. That we are in this now, not yet moment in the kingdom, and that Jesus is returning. And so we're fasting to look forward to that banquet with him, that time with him. And so some good reasons to fast, and if I had a couple hints to offer on this, and I'm no expert, but if I just had a couple hints, I would say if this hasn't been a habit of yours, you not practice this really at all, then like anything else, we talk about this with quiet times, with all kinds of these spiritual disciplines, right? Start small. Do something that you can succeed at,
Right.
right? And so maybe that's lunch one day a week, or whatever it is, and but start small, and then you can grow and progress and change, and secondly, I would say plan what you're going to do instead.
Yeah.
So don't just say, okay, I'm going to skip lunch on Thursdays.
You're just sitting
this
around.
month.
Yeah.
But have a plan.
Yeah.
Okay, and instead of lunch this Thursday, I'm gonna read Ephesians, and I'm gonna journal through that, or I need to spend time talking to God about these 3 decisions in my life. But have that plan ahead of time, so okay, I'm gonna go and do this instead. Which is really the point of fasting.
Right.
We've all mentioned that, and so just have a plan to do that. So that's what I was thinking about fasting today.
Yeah, that's really good. I had a professor who, actually that's not true. He spoke. He's one of the pastors in Joplin, and he did a thing on fasting, and he had fasted for 40 days. And he had built up to it, like over the years,
right.
And so he was in his 50s, I think, when he did it. And that was one of the big things he said was just the time he had. And so, he said, during staff or during the work week, he would go and he would just drive in front of his congregates' houses and just pray for them. Yeah. And so he was using that time to pray.
Awesome.
And and so I remember that standing out, like the things you don't think you're going to have, like you have this time. And so what do you do with that? And
It's interesting to me too that if you were a big fat guy and you were trying to figure out, okay, how do I lose a little weight, and so you read about this stuff and study this, that right now there's this really pretty big movement for health reasons, to intermittent fasting, right? People are trainers and doctors and all, they're talking about the benefits of to your physical health to fast on an intermittent basis, and how people are like, oh yeah, that makes sense, I'll do that.
The science is there,
right? When it's your physical health,
right?
And just the contrast to that, okay, well maybe you ought to think about this for your spiritual well-being. And we're like, we're much more leery of that.
Yeah.
Just there probably benefits to both. I'm no expert in that.
Yeah.
Well, it makes sense too, because if you live in a world where it's like everything's at your fingertips, and you think, what does it look like for someone to never have to pause what they're like a little kid? Oh, you like candy? Well, let's not regulate that. You can do whatever you want. And you're like, well, that's not good for the kid. And as adults, it's like, what I want, when I want, the convenience I want, and it's like that's also not healthy. That's not
right.
So I agree. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys so much, and thank you everyone for joining us. We will be taking next week off. We have a little break for Thanksgiving, and then we will see you guys in 2 weeks.
Yeah, absolutely.